Okay, all right, so I'll call to order the, assuming you're good to go, Mr. Clerk.
We are, Your Worship.
Okay, so I'm going to call the council workshop of November 23rd to order. We have first the resolution to hold a public meeting without public in attendance, moved by Councillor Murray. Is there a seconder for that motion?
I'll second that.
Seconded, although I guess, yes, seconded by Councillor Back. Okay, any discussion on that? I'll call the question on that motion. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Council, we have an agenda that's been presented for the workshop this evening. Are there any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Hearing none, will someone move adoption of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Murray. Is there a seconder on the matter? Seconded by Councillor Back. Call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Next up, we have meeting minutes from the October 26th Council Workshop meeting minutes. Are there any errors or omissions from the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Hearing none, it's moved by Councillor Murray. Is there a seconder on the motion? I've got Councillor Hanson. Call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. And if people want to see everybody all at once in the top right corner where it says view, if you click on it and go down to gallery view, then that will bring up everybody that's got video. If you go to speaker view, then it's going to give you the most recent speakers combined with the main host's presentation. But you can switch between those two things in the top right corner under view. All right, reports from councillor staff. We have the District North Vancouver Draft Child Care Action Plan. And I know that this has been a long time coming on this project. It's a report from Stephen McIntyre, but I don't see Stephen on our list, so I'm going to assume it's Dan Milburn.
Thank you, Worship. Tonight we have a presentation from Ms. Atva, after which we'd be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Atva.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, members of council and committee, members of the public who are attending, and staff. First off, I'd like to introduce a couple people who will be part of the workshop today. First off, Erica Branson, who is the district's new social planner. She joined us in last month and is quickly coming up to speed on a number of really great portfolios, including childcare. And secondly, Sandra Menzer, who is part of the consulting team who's helped guide this childcare action plan right from the start, from the inventory stage, right up to the engagement and up to the action plan, which we'd like to run through with you today.
Great, go ahead.
Great, if you could let me know, please, if you can see the slides.
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. So what we'd like to give you a quick overview today in this slide portion anyhow is what the draft childcare action plan is saying. What we like to point out is that on the district's website, if you put in childcare action plan, you will come to a copy of this plan, as well as a number of really interesting appendices which have some very good information in them. We have a good policy context behind us already for childcare. We know that our OCP, which is our guiding visionary document, talks about social well-being, and childcare is a critical part of that. It also talks about making sure we have enough space for childcare, and that's a big part of what this action plan is looking at as well. We also have a childcare policy. It was started, I think, in about 1990, but has been updated. But it also sets out a lot of good framework. It says things like the district will take a leadership role, talks about supporting existing childcare, talks about how to integrate childcare through development and looking at high neighborhoods with higher need. So a lot of good work in there that has been guiding work that the district has been doing. Also talks about advocacy as well, for example, to senior levels of government. We also have a childcare grants program, as you know, comes to council in about June or July every year, where this year we distributed approximately $55,000, really ranging in small amounts for 17 or 20 or so different childcares to do important things that help the childcares function better. The methodology for the Child Care Action Plan was quite intense. We were able to look at inventory of spaces and pull that together. We looked at a lot of best practices, not only from around BC and Canada, but also internationally as well. And again, I'll point out that there are appendices on our website that will let the reader, any of you can go and take a closer look at. We also looked at what do we do right now in terms of our regulations and procedures, because we do have regulation bylaws in place. We have guides that try and make the process a bit easier. We have different bylaws, zoning bylaws. Childcare is touched on in a number of places. So we really wanted to understand what works well and what really could be improved as well. I want to mention the engagement because it was really intense. You'll remember for this project that we were successful, like many other municipalities, in getting a grant from the Union of BC Municipalities. Council also last year decided that we wanted to do more, so provided some additional funds to do surveys of, and what we did, for example, surveys of parents, surveys of childcare providers. There were a number of focus groups and interviews as well. We talked with our other local North Shore municipalities, with the 2 First Nations. We had some special meetings with underserved populations as well. What was also interesting in how this came together at the beginning of 2020 were 2 solutions workshops. I was able to be at both of those and was really impressed at the knowledge around the room, our North Shore partners, and also community organizations, looking at trying to put all of this research together in a plan that would help us over the next 10 years to make sure childcare needs are better addressed. The action plan focuses on 4 key areas with 29 supporting actions. There is a chart as well in the plan that sets out the timeframes for these, but I'd like to walk through the 4 key goal areas relatively quickly, if I may, Your Worship.
Please.
Access to childcare. Now, access is really mainly about the supply and the amount of spaces that we have. And we know that it's hard to find childcare. The location of spaces doesn't always suit families looking for childcare. Hours of operation don't always work for everybody either. We've got about 3,000 spaces in our updated inventory right now. We believe that we will need about 2,000 more in the next 10 years in order to address this issue around access to childcare. How will we do that? Well, the second bullet here is kind of the crux of it. We really want to focus on a measure that looks at a ratio of childcare spaces for 100 kids. So we're just going to call that our targets, if you will, our targets for new childcare spaces. Childcare is broken down into the little kids, the infant and toddlers, then the preschoolers, and then school-age kids. Those are the kids. Those are the 3 consistent categories, if you will, for the age groups. So our suggestion is that the municipality consider endorsing a target of 33 spaces per every 100 infant toddlers. So that's about a third of all infant toddlers who would, if you take 100 infant toddlers, having enough child space, targeting 33 spaces. The same idea for preschool, 50 spaces per 100, and for school-age children, 33 spaces per 100. So the idea of targets is new for us, but it is something that is being explored quite enthusiastically, not only on the North Shore, but throughout British Columbia. Another key point here is knowing that childcare in town centers can accommodate accomplish many good things. We also want to continue to focus on those neighborhoods, or focus even more on those neighborhoods that have lower need, right, or lower number of spaces right now. And the last point here, using district lands and resources, we are fortunate to have maybe about a dozen different sites in the district that are used for childcare, and we want to continue to do this in a way that is equitable and focuses on areas of need. The second goal area is improving affordability, and that means for sure fees for parents, because daycare is a tough thing to afford. But it also means, what we also heard from childcare providers is that the affordability piece is also around being able to pay staff good wages, being able to find affordable locations within the district. So what can we do as a municipality? Well, one, we can look at reducing fees. So in this case, we're talking about our fees, our permitting fees and licensing fees, for example. We can continue to find the right way to lease our own land at an affordable rate. We can continue our childcare program, as I mentioned earlier, but we can also continue to lobby senior governments. So many of these actions are pieces of work that we have been doing to different degrees. The Child Care Action Plan is trying to pull this together in a more strategic and structured way to continue doing that and maybe do that in a smarter way. Quality. What does quality childcare mean? Well, it's quality of staff. Of course, it's a quality of space, but it also is about having coordination through all the different people and individuals and groups who are involved in childcare. It's also about evaluating so that we can continually make sure we're doing better. A couple of the actions put up here, continue to look at recruitment and training for childcare educators. And again, thinking about nonprofits and the role that they play in childcare, looking at continuing to focus opportunities for nonprofit childcare on district land. One thing I remember from the workshop that council had on this topic back in March, beginning of March, was the thinking that the solutions to childcare need to be multi-pronged. So we need to look at childcare that is group childcare, family childcare, for-profit and not-for-profit. So and look at our partner areas as well. Strengthening partnerships. We, like many things on the North Shore, there's pretty good coordination, but there are areas where we can be stronger. We, work well with our municipal partners and have coordinated on the Child Care Action Plan. We all use Sandra and her team's expertise to help keep us on the, in a coordinated way. We also want to keep working with the school district, who has an opportunity to continue to look at before and after school care at school sites. There's a lot of community service groups, whether or not it's a Childcare Resource Society or childcare providers, Vancouver Coastal Health, a lot of advocacy and coordination that we want to be able to strengthen as we go forward. Implementing, this is a 10-year plan. The space targets are proposed to be rolled out over this 10-year time period. And I'll say that the targets are a way of us measuring how successful we are in meeting the needs of the little ones, the infant toddlers, to the preschoolers, and those kids who are in school. We were able to take the chart that's in the Child Care Action Plan, and we'll be figuring out what our work plan looks like, subject to council's input and direction, but have a work plan set out for us starting right at the time of approval to start to implement these pieces. We also want to be able to come back and report that progress and successes and failures to council and our partners on a regular basis. And just to end here, the recommendation before you is to receive the draft Child Care Action Plan and also to refer it to a regular meeting of council. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Atba. Thank you for the presentation. I do appreciate your commentary as well. Although I think I noted that you mentioned in your comments the for-profit as well as not-for-profit childcare. In the report, it doesn't mention for-profit childcare very much, and so I was kind of curious, where it talks about supporting existing new nonprofit and public child care sector spaces. Is it specifically excluding supporting for-profit, or is that just highlighting not-for-profit?
Thank you very much through your worship. I'll start off, and then I think Sandra might want to add a little bit here. We know that the childcare landscape right now is multifaceted. It's nonprofits, childcare is in different locations, childcare is in people's home, family childcare, and we know that that's the picture going forward as well. But what we already have been doing in our through the childcare policy that the municipality has right now is look at focusing in some places where it's strategic on the not-for-profit sector. And I'll let Sandra jump in just a sec, but not intentional in the report to exclude the for-profit sector, not at all, but is intentional to focus on some of the benefits that the not-for-profit childcare sector provides as well. So I'll just just turn it over to Sandra to provide some more info there.
Great, thank you, and hello, Mayor and Council. Pleasure to be with you guys again. So picking up on what Tina was saying, definitely not an exclusion of for-profit in here. There are, a huge amount of for-profit childcare spaces, and they do lots of good quality work. The intent here is really, I think, to capitalize also on where there's alignment with the provincial priorities and provincial requirements, and with where council can focus. And so, as you'll know, the provincial government has made a priority for capital funding and made a requirement for capital funding, for example, that you must partner with a not-for-profit or operate those services yourself if you're securing those capital dollars from the province. So the plan was really in, focusing on those and being really aligned with where the resources actually, many of the resources will be to move this childcare plan forward.
Yeah, and I can understand that when capital dollars are at play, that it makes sense to have it in that kind of a structure. The only challenge is big chunk of the service is provided in a for-profit way.
For sure.
And for-profit doesn't necessarily mean that there's extravagant wages or some other largesse. Some of the not-for-profits actually pay dramatically higher wages at the executive levels as well. So it just doesn't always mean that it's run efficiently. It doesn't always mean that it's the best deal for the community. Sometimes putting the private risk into private organizations is better for rapidly changing environments. But thank you very much for the presentation. No, that was the biggest area I was interested in at the moment. I see Councillor Murray, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. So could you just give a little bit more information on discussions or opportunities you see in regards to expanding the opportunity to put particularly before and after school daycare in the schools? Because that's been something that the community's been talking about for years and years and years. It's such a no-brainer. Especially before and after school daycare, because they're already going to go there or they're going to be there for the after school part. And then I just wanted to make a comment in regards to the Rec Commission, where some of our recreational facilities they're next to a lot of schools, and the fit that could be realized. So not sure who's going to answer that or comment.
Thanks. I'll start off. Thank you very much, Councillor Murray, through the mayor. Definitely the school district's a key partner, and a lot of our, a lot of the success already comes from the school district doing what they do. We know that their focus is on education, but that there's opportunities to continue to look at childcare in schools. I was pretty excited is actually the word at the solutions workshops earlier this year, with some of the work and thinking that I had seen from the school district, and looking at each of their schools, all of their lands, and trying to understand how this expanded role or this role might look for them to look at offering before and after school in an ongoing or even maybe enhanced way. So happy to have those relationships continue to be stronger. And
oh, yikes. Don't know what happened there.
Well, maybe turn it to see if Sandra wants to add a comment.
Yeah, thank you. I will, just to say that, there's two kind of shifts that have happened with the school district. And for sure, as we talked about at the March workshop, the school district was very engaged and has been super helpful in terms of doing a whole bunch of their own work, of looking, as Tina said, at the land and spaces they have available. But the two kind of key shifts where we will see, presumably, the school district playing quite a different role. One is a direction to become a true partner in before and after school child care programs, and so a different role in and a change in legislation that allows school districts to legally operate those services if they so wish, and that's what's actually happening in other parts of the province now. But the second shift is during the campaign, during the election campaign, the government did announce that childcare was going to be moving under the auspice, if that's the right word, into the Ministry of Education from a policy and service move. We don't know yet, of course, how that's going to play out, but that was a pretty significant announcement to be made. So we do foresee, if that is indeed going to happen, that the school districts have a completely different role potentially.
That's a great update in regards to moving that need into the schools, because it just, again, seems like a no-brainer. So just my final comment would be the Rec Commission, we have talked about this at the Rec Commission in regards to, and I use Blue Ridge Elementary School as a good example of a after-school program that occurs on Wednesdays, because Blue Ridge Elementary School actually for decades has closed early on Wednesday as part of the collective agreement with the union. And so the school children have been walked down by youth workers from Ron Andrews Pool to go and spend time at the rec center before they're picked up by their parents. And it's been a really successful program. And we certainly flagged it at our rec commission meetings at the beginning of the year, I think last year, in regards to looking at expanding more of those programs, because we have a lot of elementary schools that sit around our recreational facilities. And certainly we're putting one into Lower Lynn and one into Lower Cap. So Lower Cap might be a bit challenging with Pemberton, but it is a good fit. And so the Rec Commission does have it on their radar. So thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillors Forbes, Curran, and Mr. Stewart. Did you just have a quick comment first?
You're just a quick comment, just to remind council, in fact, that we have a meeting with the school board in December, and in fact, we placed this very item on the agenda for discussion.
Councillor Forbes.
Yes, I think Councillor Murray covered. I was going to bring up the schools as well, so she covered that point for me. The one other thing I just wanted to ask was those targets then that are being listed, the targets that you're looking for, are those targets applying only for the district to find that number, or is that allowing for all the other areas of family care that there are, like private homes and for-profit? And so is that an inclusive total or not?
I'll turn that to Sandra.
For sure. Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Yes, that's all inclusive. That is what, through the work, what, you know, the targets are about trying to meet all of the needs. It's not to say that this is going to be the district's responsibility or this is so-and-so's responsibility. It really is all inclusive. And in fact, it needs the whole entire gamut of services really to, or sorry, service providers to in fact begin to meet these targets going forward.
Good. One other question. I know you said you reach out in the groups that you met. Did you get representation from all those other groups that you're talking about?
Tina, shall I? Yeah.
Go ahead, Sandra.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we actually did. We got good representation from the whole gamut, the whole range of service providers through a workshop. We actually did engaging those, whole broad range of service providers through that. We also, through the childcare operators survey, had a really good return from, again, the cross-section family programs group, not-for-profit, and group private for-profit. So it was really diverse feedback. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillors Curran and Bond and Hanson. Councillor Curran.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was a really eye-opening report. And I really think that my response was like, this is a crisis. This isn't just something that we need to like get to. I think I was looking, I like the quality, focusing the quality of the care. I think that I read I did read a UNICEF report that said the first 5 years of a child's brain development are the most critical in their entire lives. So that is so important for that to be centered from what is the best interest for the child. And I'll just say that it's probably never someone that's in this business for profit. if that's your motivation. So I do have a lot of concerns with the privatization of childcare. And looking at this systemically, it's been privatized because of a chronic lack of funding from the federal government to the provincial government to municipalities. I think it's important for people to understand that childcare has not been a municipal mandate typically, although it of course there are neighbors and our folks who are saying this happens, but we're as much as I don't like hierarchies, we kind of are at the end of the road here. So I think that's important for folks to understand. I'm pleased to see that there is more emphasis about the urgency from both the federal government and the provincial government, which can definitely help us in doing what we need to do. I wondered if you could speak a bit about, and I know during COVID, speaking of, childcare was clearly an essential service. Because the caregivers are disproportionately women, and women in Canada earn disproportionate money to men, particularly racialized women, who earn 59 cents on the dollar for a non-racialized male or man. How are we addressing this from a data perspective in terms of the most impacted, which tend to be racialized communities? And that's both from a care provider. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't see that discussed in the report. And I know there's a lot more emphasis around data collection. And so could staff speak to that, please?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, through your worship. I will say, when I was reading through the community engagement summary report, all of these, the various engagements that we did with vulnerable populations, that there's a lot of good insight there in terms of, maybe not necessarily on the racial perspective, but on the vulnerable populations, the parents who are really looking for specific childcare needs for their children, or who are working different and difficult hours to accommodate childcare. So I think that additional engagement really helped to pull through some of those threads.
Okay.
Sandra, would you like to add anything to that? Sandra, was that more of those?
Yeah, for sure. Councillor, and through the mayor, I mean, you're asking just a really key question, and there was, an equity lens, if you will, put on the community engagement pieces here by going out and intentionally through focus groups, small focus groups and one-on-one, and reaching out through those organizations that are actually supporting those more underserved populations to really hear and learn and understand. So we did hear, learn, and understand. And certainly, the number one issue that we heard is the affordability, that, the cost of childcare is just unmanageable, untenable for those who are already most vulnerable and most underserved. And it's really our recommendation in the report and what the community partners spoke about, local government doesn't have the resources to really impact that affordability shift. That really does need to come from the senior levels of government. And so a joint push, a joint lobby, a joint advocacy approach to ensure that, childcare can become affordable for everybody is critical, as is wages, as I think Mayor Little identified earlier. The wages across the board in childcare, whether you're for profit or not for profit, are low. And again, the group that can make the most impact on that is not the local government. It is the senior levels of government in terms of shifting that priority. So continuing to kind of push that.
Thank you for that. I did just one thing that I've just recently learned and I want to share is not really referring to people as vulnerable, but referring to them as marginalized, because they're not they're not vulnerable. They're actually marginalized by the system. So I think that's an important point. But I did want to because I feel like after reading that and hearing the quotes, like I'm deciding between feeding my child or going to work, and then the COVID lens. I know that we're doing some COVID work, but I just wondered if we could, and it doesn't have to be now, but really understand the impacts of this from COVID and how we see that changing. The other thing is I found, and I just wanted to ask staff, there's an early learning and childcare innovation grant that was, the deadline is December 3rd, but it was only just announced at the end of October. And have we applied for that? And if not, I feel like we could receive up to $3 million as a municipality for that grant. And that's the federal government saying, oh, like, wow, we're not putting our money where our values should be. And so I was just thinking of things like modular. We have kind of talked about this, but like, you know, modular units on parking lots, like really, how do we urgently get some resources available? And I think it's like that real creative, and that's what the fund is about. It's about innovation and working with Indigenous partners. I know Squamish Nation just did a modular childcare site that's very exciting, and CAP has some exciting stuff happening. So there are some things happening, but just that nature-centered outdoor living, I mean, that's what I'm hearing, or outdoor learning, I'm hearing that's something that is really foundational. And so I would hope that council could help lend some support to us applying for that grant. I know it's a tight turnaround, but they only just announced it, so I wouldn't want to miss that opportunity. Thank you.
Ms. Hadba?
Thank you very much. We are keeping our eye out on as many opportunities as we can, and we have looked at others recently. And you know, part of being able to respond quickly is being ready to do so. And one of the actions in this draft plan is to position us better, having some high-level cost estimates, having some building models ready. So all that just to say that part of what we want to do is make sure we are ready and we can launch more quickly when we see opportunities like this. So definitely we'll take a look at this one some more.
Ms. Menzer?
If I can just jump in, the federal funding excludes capital. So you're not able to build buildings or buy land. It's really about piloting programs and some services about that. So just wanted to throw that in.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillors Bond, Hanson, and back. Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Mayor Little. I'd just like to add my voice behind the comments that Councillor Curran made about looking at the data that we are receiving through the lens of those who have been marginalized. It's not just the people that are looking for childcare, as Councillor Curran said, but the people that are working in childcare. And I think if we have this opportunity to collect data about that and about who is working and how they are marginalized, you know, we have housing issues on the North Shore. You know, people that you know, racialized workers that are coming here to work in our childcare facilities. You know, we need to understand more about that as well. So any work that we can do while we're doing this effort to understand that more, and then put that forward to those that have the most impact, the federal government and the provincial government, to support that part of the system, because quality is both sides, right? And so supporting those who are working in this really important field, I think, is very key. The other thing, in reading through the report and the action plan, there's a lot of really great data and information there. So thanks for staff and our consulting team for all the work that you've put in to gather all this information. I'm wondering how the target number of 33 and 50 and 33 for each age group was arrived on, and I'm wondering if there's any difference based on the demographic data that you've collected for our community specifically and the different neighborhoods in our community, whether that number would be different from the number, say, in other communities with different demographics.
Zappa?
Thank you. I'll start off through your worship. The targets that are set out in this plan, 33 for 100, 50 for preschool, 33 for school age, are district wide. We haven't put them to a neighborhood level. I think Sandra will be able to say, based on her experience with other municipalities, if that's the orientation of the question here, what are other communities, what are other municipalities looking at in terms of their targets? So I'll turn that to Sandra, and I think Sandra will also give some more insight on those targets and how they respond to the number of parents at home and work and elements such as that.
Ms. Menzer?
Great, thank you. So the targets that are proposed here, recommended here, and thought about here are actually quite aligned with what's happening in many of the other parts of the province, and many other, in particular Metro Vancouver. That's kind of the space over a 10-year period where people are feeling comfortable. The challenge, and I think I shared this at the council workshop in March, the challenge is that there are no standards, there are no sort of established formulas on, you know, if you have this many children, here's how many childcare spaces are actually needed. So in light of not having those standards or those benchmarks, if you will, the work that was done in community and using some of the research from other jurisdictions was saying, okay, those jurisdictions that do have a publicly funded system, what is their space coverage? What does that look like? In Quebec, which is the only publicly funded system in Canada, about 55 spaces per every 100 children. In other parts of the world, like the EU, where it is a publicly funded system, they set targets of 33%, 90%, in fact. And so it's a bit of an exercise of going and looking at what are others looking at, and then specifically looking at the demographics and the profiles. How many families are working? What does the labor force participation rates look like? And then, you know, establishing some targets that are 10-year targets that are, you know, achievable with some additional supports from other and partnerships from others, somewhat realistic, but we also know that 33% likely doesn't cover the true need if, you know, 70% of moms, for example, are in the workforce. But it's a starting place to kind of go in light of not having those established kind of targets or benchmarks.
I think that's a great explanation, and you know, I think you were kind of getting on that topic of we don't really know how much need or desire there is for childcare until that childcare is provided, and I think that's important to see as well. You know, there's lots of families in the community who, for whatever reason, whether it's cost or availability or other reasons, choose to have one or more parents stay at home and care for children. And so it's hard to kind of tease that out of the data. So I'm glad that that's being acknowledged. And I think, you know, looking forward to this 10-year action plan, I'd be interested to see how we're going to monitor and follow up on this. So as more spaces and more services being provided, how many people are taking that up, and do we need to look for the next 5 years after how we start and responding to the needs that are being seen in the community. So I appreciate this work. This is very important, and it's been a lot of work so far. So I'm looking forward to seeing this move forward.
Councillor Bond, if I can, through the mayor, if I can just add one more piece around need. Childcare is so closely tied to affordability. The moment that childcare becomes affordable, for example, on the North Shore, there is $10 a day prototype sites. The moment that childcare becomes affordable, the waiting lists go up, the demand goes up. Those families who are choosing, not by real choice, but choosing to, you know, shift, you know, schedules between mom and dad, or, you know, grandparents, or, you know, other, because they can't actually afford. So that's the other thing to monitor, you know, as a public system unfolds, which is what the provincial government has said. What is the impact there going forward?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Bond. Next, I have Councillor Hanson, Back, and Murray. Councillor Hanson.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd like to offer my sincere compliments on the report. I thought it was a very impressive document, a very sophisticated analysis. I delved into it with great detail, and I learned so much. It really was very important for me. I noted, for example, the dramatic shortage in my home neighborhood of Seymour. I noted the dramatic shortage in the 1 to 3 year age group, and the dramatic shortage in the flexible hours, people who work shifts and so forth. And reading the report, the whole issue became very real and concrete for me. And I really thank you for that level of detail and the statistics. I absolutely support the goals. I absolutely support the action steps. So our big goal is to get 2,000 new spaces. And of course, that involves a combination of all sorts of aspects. One of the thoughts that occurred to me as I read that is that this is in a 7-year period when I imagine there's going to be significant retirements from the staffing side of childcare. So the total staff requirements, it would seem to me, would be quite dramatic in terms of recruitment. And it caused me to wonder, and perhaps the question that I'm going to ask, and perhaps it would be useful to us, is from your expert lens, what do you see as really the biggest challenge in achieving this goal? Where do you think the most heavy work needs to be done in order for us to achieve this goal, which is so important for our community?
Tina,
Sure, I'll start with one of the biggest challenges that I see, and that we've had the chance through this analysis to look at our neighborhoods and to map those out. We had a little bit of time to look at making it clear on our maps, as clear as possible, where the targets, where our target for 2030 is really far from being met. So I think when we look at on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, I see that as a challenge. And again, we've been trying to do that, and town centers is a part of that. And our policy says to focus on those areas of need. So given that, there are, the childcare landscape is made up of many people, from nonprofit operators, for-profit operators, family, municipal roles, school district. I see a challenge, and I guess it's a good one to kind of match the numbers with geography. And yeah, I think there are a number of challenges, and the number 2,000 spaces is only part of the picture. The targets really, and when I talk with Erica about this, and we talk about targets and think about going forward over the next year and what our work plan looks like, the targets is really a way to help us measure how well are we doing.
Thank you, Ms. Atha. Ms. Menzer, any other comments?
Yeah, if I can add to Councillor Hansen's or respond to that question. Finding capital dollars and securing capital dollars for the district to have an impact on spaces is going to be a challenge. We're certainly optimistic that there is going to be more capital funding rolling from senior levels of government soon, but that's a challenge, I think. But the second challenge, and it was mentioned earlier, is finding those qualified early childhood educators and those staff to be working in those childcare programs, because if you build them and there aren't folks to staff them, not so helpful then. And so that again is, again, the biggest impact on that is going to be on what the senior levels of government can do around increasing the numbers of folks being trained and supporting folks to have access to that affordable education to be able to go out and meet that need. So the capital side and the HR side are two of the challenges going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hansen.
Right.
Councillors back. Mr. Milburn, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yes, Your Worship, thanks very much. I just wanted to point out, when we put Councillor Hansen's question to the province, their response is that the ministry is aware of the challenges in childcare in terms of affordability, shortage of spaces, and lack of qualified early childhood educators, or ECEs, to support the system. And that's why the province has indicated that they've got a 10-year Childcare BC plan, which has initiatives that include the recruitment and retention of ECEs into the system and improve compensation in the sector as well. And as part of the Childcare BC New Spaces Fund application and other grants that the province is releasing, applicants really need to detail the recruitment and retention strategies for their staff because it's an identified problem that the province feels needs to be addressed. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you very much. I'm just mindful of the time here. We do have two other subject matters. I've got Councillors Back, Murray, and Curran. Councillor Back.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will be brief because my questions were answered, but I do want to thank Ms. Atva and thank Ms. Menzer. This is an excellent report, and I enjoyed your presentation back in March on this, and really pleased with the way the action plan has come together. Yes, I'm somebody who's living this with a 6-month-old and currently on a couple of wait lists looking for that infant care. Just want to echo some of the things that Councillor Curran was saying in terms of the urgency of this and really treating it with the urgency that it deserves. I'm also looking forward to some more regular updates on this so that we can see progress as we move along. And again, just recognizing how important the partnerships are. And I'm glad that the issue is going to be discussed with the school district in our upcoming meeting, because I think back to the election campaign over 2 years ago. That was a topic then, and continues to be how we use schools for that before and after school care, as well as potential partnerships with North Van Rec. So just a comment, but thank you very much for all the work that's gone into this. It really is a great report, and I look forward to more regular updates as we move along.
Thank you, Councillor Back. Councillor Murray, second time.
I was just going to say that when we look at the work plan and timelines for the Child Care Action Plan, the draft strategy and action plan was created in March 2020, and we had been presented with another reality, which was COVID. And so I would be interested going forward how COVID is going to impact this, and with certainly the situation in the business community, and certainly many companies are rethinking how they do business. For instance, we are all on a Zoom call and having a very good discussion, and it's very effective. And many businesses, I know my girlfriend, for one, her business after 20 years on Lonsdale, they are an essential service, closed. Only their office, their business continued. They have 5 offices across Canada and 1 in the States, but they shut all their offices down because they realized they didn't actually need an office. So those mums and dads are now going back home. And the part of the concept of childcare, certainly before 5 years of age, would be if you work downtown, you probably tried to find daycare downtown, because then you could be closer to your infant or toddler at lunchtime or break, or dropping off and picking up. So, it'd be interesting to, how this COVID issue is going to shift those kinds of realities and concept for working parents. Not so much obviously with before and after school daycare, and certainly for those that are marginalized. When you're taking your kids to school, some of the challenges are transportation, certainly transportation from those before and after school daycare units to be able to even get to the school. So there's a lot of things that we have to consider and think about, and certainly this is a fabulous beginning, and let's see where we get. But it's going to be an evolving, I think it's going to be an evolving plan, as children are evolving, families are evolving. And so again, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you. Ms. Menzer, do you have any comment on the COVID effect in this industry?
Yes and no, if I can say that. We don't really know. What Councillor Murray is saying is important. Even if parents are working from home, there's still going to be a need for childcare.
Oh, yeah.
It may just look different.
It may look that was closer. My point.
Yeah, exactly. Because some folks are leaping to, well, you're working at home now, so we don't, there's not going to be as big of a need of childcare. I don't think that's the case. And I think monitoring and figuring out what the impact is. I mean, so far across Metro Vancouver, it looks like the childcare programs are back nearly to 100% capacity of what they were before COVID. But it's likely different families who are using those services than before. And so getting underneath that a little bit, paying attention to what's happening with your partners that are the service delivery folks is going to be critical.
Thank you.
And
Councillor Curran.
Yeah, I'll just be brief. I think that wage component is really important for us to understand, because obviously we want like the idea is for folks to be able to have childcare in their communities, but also have the folks who work there not have to commute in from other places. And so as we look at our social housing projects, and that's a really important consideration. So it'd be helpful to understand what sort of wages people are earning. in that field. I see Sandra's like, I have looked, and I mean, it can be from minimum wage to, you know, so I think that is really going to be eye-opening for people to understand like what people have who work in these fields, especially that piece of data I think is quite relevant. And then I wondered if staff could comment on, in the report, it mentions that 75% of the District and North Vancouver workforce works off the North Shore. That's pretty, and I can say why I think that is, but and then we have a very large percentage of low income jobs for people coming in. So we've got high income probably folks leaving and low income earners coming. And so obviously that's going to create lots of challenges. And I know this isn't new to anyone, but I just wondered, where did that data come from? Just so we could maybe look at the reverse of that, which is the folks coming into work. And then we as council can have a much better understanding of like the wages that people are earning, because we hear from employers a lot of times they can't get employees, et cetera. But a lot of times I'm hearing from service-based industries that are paying minimum wage, housing incompatibility, all the things. So we're just trying to look at it as a system, and the more data that we have, I think that would be certainly helpful. Thanks.
Ms. Branson, I see your hand up. Were you looking to respond to that, or would you like me to go to Ms. Menzer?
Through your worship, I was actually going to, a couple of questions ago, add a little bit of thought. So if Sandra, you want to go ahead and address Councillor Curran's current question, then maybe I could follow up afterwards.
Ms. Menzer?
Absolutely. So the last wage survey data that was done by the provincial government looked at the average wage for an early childhood educator to be around $18 an hour in the province. That's qualified early childhood educator, and that's gone up a bit because there's the wage enhancement top-up grants that have been available. So there hasn't been any new update. It's a couple of dollars more an hour for those qualified folks. So that's kind of the range, and lots of folks don't have any kind of benefits, extended health, any of those kinds of compensation packages, if you will, for that. The data on the commuting out of community of census data, it's the question on census data that says, you know, where do you go? How far do you go to travel for work? So that's where that stat is coming from. And we felt super important to share because it means longer hours of childcare needed and you're stuck on the bridge. And we heard all these horror stories from families through this work around how challenging when the hours of childcare may close at 5:30, where you can't get back in time. So the solution is close to home childcare, which, you know, the 2,000 spaces will get towards some of that.
Thank you. Ms. Branson, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. Through your worship, to the group, following up, I guess, in terms of the impact of COVID-19 and the disproportionate impact on women potentially. I think some of the considerations to think about are women as well are more likely to rely on food banks, on shelters, other support services, and often the ones that are more often doing the unpaid work. So there definitely is a disproportionate impact on women. And quite a bit of work has been done by Vancouver Coastal Health, my most recent employer as well, that's just looked at some of the groups that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. And then the other piece was the question that came around, you know, what are those the considerations in terms of, you know, what would be, how do we know that we may be moving forward in terms of increasing the childcare supply? And a lot of the research says, you know, number one is to have a childcare strategy, which we're moving forward with. The other is to have accurate needs assessments, which I think that the district is doing a good job on. For local government to be able to provide very transparent and clear information plans on ways for for-profit or non-for-profit or other groups to be able to establish childcare. And then the last are potentials in terms of offering incentives. And I think that we have many of those as well. So I think we have a lot of the key building blocks in place to be able to succeed in this childcare plan. And then the other specific to the 6 to 12-year-olds, the school age kids, I think the work that's happening in the province around increased involvement with the school district is going to really have a positive impact on children and families being able to access care close to the schools in appropriate places. So thank you for letting me contribute.
I think there's a lot of support out there, particularly for that partnership with the school district. You can see the obvious synergies of having those kinds of services in. Back when when they had the prior contract language and there was additional space within the school, we started to see these kinds of partnerships grow up in the facility. The challenge was always that when a Ministry of Education priority crept up, everything got punted out the door, and it was very destabilizing in the community and the services that were being offered. And so anytime we do engage in that way, we need protections to make sure that it is not subject to the whims of changes of MOE priorities, so that those kinds of services can be counted on in years future. So, but we're all looking forward to that as a potential source. Councillor Curran, you had the floor, just checking to see if you had completed your comments. You're muted.
Yeah, thank you. And nice to meet you, sort of, Eric. Please call me Megan. Never call me Councillor Curran, please.
Thank you very much. Okay, I saw Mr. Teban. I saw that you had put your hand up and you took your hand down. Can I just check in with you? This is an area that I know you have a lot of expertise and experience on. We don't want to miss your comments if you had something to say.
Well, thank you. Yes, I do have a few comments. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, most of council, I think, will recall that Mrs. Tevan is a owner proprietor of a child care service. She's in the sector of 3 to 5 year olds, offers all day, 8:30 to 3:30, or segments of the day to her families. So yes, we have quite a bit of experience in that field. And I've written to you, council, this weekend with some ideas that I hope that you're able to take to the school board. So I won't take time with that right now. But what I will say is this, that here at council meetings and workshops, the language that I hear is that the test of quality is either for-profit or non-profit. But within the industry, the field, the education field of ECE, we do not hear of such distinctions. What we hear about is licensed or unlicensed. If you want to talk about a test of quality of facility or operation, to me, that is the test. I have to confess, I am struggling to keep myself calm because some of the comments of members of this council following the presentation are so offensive that it is so upsetting to listen to an assertion that my wife would discriminate between her employees as to their wages because of the color of their skin. That could not be further from the truth. So I invite you, if you're looking for opportunities to help invest in more spaces, what I would suggest this is to you. Use public funds, things like CACs, for establishing playgrounds nearby childcare operations that can be shared assets that the childcare operators can use for a portion of the day and members of the public can use. I think there is an opportunity. But if you want to talk about nonprofit versus for-profit, what really is the difference between the two? In one, I retain part of my earnings for next year's expenses. In the other, I promise to pay out 100% of my income in wage and benefits, and maybe elect a board. That's the only difference between a so-called nonprofit and a so-called for-profit. I can tell you that my wife's operation is competitive on wages, is competitive on income or fees. However, does not participate in the government wage enhancement or fee reduction programs because they balloon out the administrative work and they don't provide enough benefit, and they give up too much control of the operation to the government. So she has not opted into those programs because the work to satisfy the requirements is onerous. So I invite you to, looking forward, talk about licensed versus non-licensed, not for-profit and not for profit, because really, what is profit? It's just retained earnings. And you know, Mrs. T. Van's operation could easily become a nonprofit by just paying out 100% of all her income. That's it. So that's what I have to offer on the subject of childcare. Thank you.
Mr. Stephen? Councillor Curran, is that your hand up still from before?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond because there was a mischaracterization of something that I referenced, which is a 10-year study Canada-wide, just simply indicating that racialized women earn 59 cents on the dollar to non-racialized men. It was a very general finding, and women in Canada, non-racialized women earn 67 cents to the dollar. This was a 10-year study that I was referencing. Happy to provide where that came from, but it had nothing to do with just wanted to make sure that was clear.
It's a macro level figure statistic. It wasn't specific to any particular operation. Thank you, Councillor Curran, for clarifying that. Mr. Stewart, did you have a comment?
Just a brief comment. Mr. T-Van's comments, where they're generalized, are quite helpful. When they're specific to his own interests and his wife's interests are a little on the border. That's all I would say.
Okay. Well, we want to benefit from their experience in our discussion. So thank you very much, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Stephen, thank you very much. At this time, we do have two other items that we need to move on to. I want to thank everyone, including our guests and our consultant here today, for contributing to this workshop. Thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to the financial plan. And I'm assuming that Mr. Daniluk's going to do the presentation, but Mr. Wardell, would you like to open up?
Through your worship, the presentation tonight is on the 10-year long-term financial plan. It is the companion plan to the corporate plan, and it looks at a 10-year window. We have brought that to the prior council, and we have talked recently about bringing this forward. So our objective over the next 18 months is to start bringing the financial plan, long-term financial plan, back to council and starting to quantify the impacts, so we can get a real good sense of, I'll say, choosing childcare as an example, the targets that we have in many areas that bring this corporate plan together and is expressed through the perspective of the financial lens. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mr. Daniluk.
Thank you, Mr. Wardell. Mr. Daniluk, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Little. Good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the public. I'm Rick Daniluk, Manager, Business Planning and Decision Support. Tonight, I'll be providing a brief update on the long-term financial plan. Staff are preparing an analysis of our long-term funding needs and are aiming to present an update on these figures early in next year. Before I continue, I'd like to point out a couple of errors in the materials circulated. On the third slide, it should read budget update in the timeline under the long-term plan under November. And on the sixth slide, the climate goal should read climate action and environmental management. The presentation has been updated for those changes, so apologies for that. While this is a long-term financial plan presentation, the discussion in my mind is really about community needs that have been identified in our plans and strategies, and how we might fund these needs within our affordability limits. For example, the rental and affordable housing strategy includes estimated demand for social and supportive housing. The transportation update presented earlier in the year aims to connect the town and village centers with an active transportation network. The community energy and emission plan looks towards 2030 and 2050 as we strive to achieve net zero in our carbon emissions. And the childcare plan presented earlier tonight aims for an average of 37 childcare spaces per 100 children in the community, almost double what's in place today. These are a few of the needs expressed in the district's plans and strategies. The financial plan is addressing any funding gaps after applying our existing funding strategies and looking to develop new strategies to keep the plans affordable. When we look at our information as it exists today, or the early indications are there will be funding gaps over the long term and reserve levels will be low. The balance of the presentation will take approximately 10 minutes, and we'll follow these topics, and we'll start with the timeline. We are in November, of course, and last week we presented an update on utility rates and user fees. This week we're providing a brief update starting with this long-term plan and then moving along to the budget update. In 2 weeks, we'll be amending the 2020 financial plan before providing another update on the 2021 plan in January. We'll then introduce the 2021 financial plan to Council and the public in February. So what is the long-term plan? It summarizes the district's approved plans and strategies, describing the strategic directions, future service levels, and desired trends. Through the long-term financial plan, we apply a financial lens and prioritize investments and services to ensure the plans are affordable. When the framework is in place, it will help inform future decisions. You've seen this graphic before. We have the corporate plan in the center, and the corporate plan guides work within 2 timeframes. Council's 4-year term is represented by council directions on the left, and the organization's 10-year strategic planning framework is represented by strategies and long-term planning on the right. The 10-year strategic planning framework includes these elements. The organization's long-term goals, which include strategic directions, future service levels as identified in these plans and strategies, and the long-term financial plan develops financial strategies to fund these needed new investments. Finally, a prioritization process will help address any remaining imbalance. As an example of this framework, we saw one earlier tonight when we talked about childcare. The plan includes directions to improve childcare and to make it more affordable in the community. The desired service level is an average of 37 spaces per 100 children, along with new guidelines for facilities and facility standards. While the majority of the spaces will be provided through others, the district does have a role, and we will be developing new funding strategies to support this emerging need. The long-term plan is shaped by our long-term goals. As an organization, the 5 corporate goals we've identified are to enhance livability and mobility, to foster community safety, health, and resiliency, to lead in climate emergency action and environmental management, to achieve a balanced and fair economy, and to support a sustainable and service-oriented organization. The long-term financial plan will produce a funding gap analysis for each goal area, enabling a focus on outcomes for the community. The new reserve bylaw aligns closely with these goals and provides council a tool to establish required funding levels. As we turn to funding needed new investments under the long-term goals, we first apply our existing financial strategies, which fall into the categories shown on this slide. Applying these strategies is the first step to making the plans more affordable. We monitor our services to ensure we keep pace with changes in demand, cost recovery, our mandate, and explore options for service delivery and efficiency. For a number of years now, we've practiced evidence-based decision-making to ensure investments are aligned with strategic directions. We've developed a number of capital funding strategies, including sustainable funding to ensure existing assets are maintained in a state of good repair, sustainable development to ensure accuracy in developer charges. We direct tax growth from redevelopment to active transportation to address that need. And we're practicing demand management where we can to reduce pressure on our existing facilities and infrastructure. We consider efficiencies before assets are replaced, including consolidation, relocation, and reduction. And we monitor grants to maximize external funding and are exploring alternative revenue sources. Those are our existing capital funding strategies. Our utilities are self-sustaining and are supported by a long-term utility rate model. We flow through regional charges and stabilize rates through the use of reserves. We review regional charges to ensure our member municipalities are receiving maximum value for money. Our property tax strategy is based on public finance principles. We review rates in the region to make sure we compare well and are competitive. And we're providing leadership and participation in the Municipal Finance Reform Initiative in the region and the province. We use reserves and debt strategically. The new reserve bylaw reflects the needs identified in the planning framework. And in the near future, there will be opportunities to leverage debt, which is currently at historically low rates. We practice procurement and project management strategies. So where appropriate, the scope of work might be expanded to increase interest from the marketplace. And we seek to reduce community impacts by bundling projects in local areas rather than going in and then coming back later on. And finally, it's not shown on the slide, but we can continue to explore use of the district lands to support some of our emerging needs. After applying these existing financial strategies, staff will produce a funding gap analysis and summarize the findings under each long-term goal. We'll make provisions for risks and contingencies, and we'll explore new financial strategies to address the emerging needs. And as we look to remaining gaps, we may need to rethink our current approach of inflation plus 1% over the long term. And we'll be introducing a prioritization framework in the spring of next year to help with that discussion. In terms of next steps, we'll be adding updates to the long-term plan that we received over the fall. The information is evolving, so it won't be perfect, but it will be a good starting point for future discussions. And we'll be back to share the initial gap analysis later in January. That concludes my presentation, and I look forward to hearing your initial feedback. Whoops. Oh my gosh.
You're muted, Mike.
No. Did I just do the whole presentation in mute?
No.
No, not you, Rick.
Not you. Don't worry about it, Rick.
My life just flashed before my eyes.
It was your best presentation yet.
Thank you.
Okay, Council, I actually don't see any speakers from Council. I realize that this is a very early stage in this process, but if there are any comments from Council before we move on to the next item. Okay, it's obviously linked to the.
Sorry.
Councillor Kern, I don't see your hand raised. There you go.
Trying to. Thank you for that. I just wondered, because in the deck, it did talk about the carbon budget approach, and I just wondered if staff could speak a little bit to how that might connect with our financial plan, so that Council has that information when we're making decisions. If I need to go further than that, or is that enough?
Mr. Danlock, did you hear the question?
I did. So through your worship, we're looking at both the community and corporate carbon emission targets. And so as we make investments in our own facilities, we're definitely considering the impacts, and we'll be measuring those impacts, especially as we replace facilities and improve the active transportation network. And through Dan's office and the building step code policy, we'll be making impacts on the community carbon levels, along with other initiatives to support reaching the targets in the future. Mr. Stewart or Mr. Milburn might have other comments to add to that.
Mr. Stewart?
Your worship, this is a very introductory set of comments about a long-term financial plan. we've been trying to do this, quite frankly, as a staff for probably 10 years, and it never seems to be the right time. But as we struggle with a COVID attitude, which is really about the short term and how we're dealing with this, we still feel as staff, we need to start to look out 10 and 20 years and get into those interesting conversations about how we maintain a resilient and a community that we're all proud of. So thanks to Rick for actually starting this discussion. We've been doing work, and I will say for a long time, on crunching numbers, and we're continuing to do that. And I look forward to the discussion next year with council as we think about ourselves, not 5 years from now, but 10 and 20 and 30.
Mr. Stewart, Councillor Curran, that was your question, I guess.
No, I just feel like it was part of the climate and ecological emergency response was a carbon budget. And so I'll just keep coming back to it. I just think as we look at long-term planning, there's nothing more important than deciding that investing now is going to cost a lot less than the cost of inaction later. And so I think that's really important. And the idea of using that as a lens, that you use the same type of clarity, trade-offs, that you would with a financial budget, because financial budgets are something that we're really good at. So I appreciate that. I think it would just help us inform our direction to apply that same level of thinking behind how we're going to reduce our carbon pollution. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much. I see Councillors Hanson and Bond. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Danelik, you tantalized us with the phrases, there will be funding gaps on the one hand and reserve levels will be low. I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit for the benefit of the public watching. What do you see as the implications of that? What exactly, how significant do you see that challenge to be for us? And what are you hinting at perhaps with those statements?
Thank you. Through your worship, when we look at the 5-year financial plan as it's approved right now, and we look at the reserve levels for new investments, we know that those levels are already low before addressing new and emerging needs. We've seen new needs through the transportation update. We've seen needs tonight as well in the earlier presentation. So that's one aspect. When it comes to our existing assets, we have previously identified a funding gap there, and as we look to adapt our infrastructure for the impacts of climate, there definitely will be a more significant investment required up front. So we imagine, at least in the near term, that gap will expand somewhat. And then when it comes to other gaps, there's gaps related to risks and some of the adaptation that we need to make in other areas for climate and natural hazards, as well as just keeping pace with some of the contributions that we like to see to make sure growth is paying its way, and that we're keeping pace with other changes. So as we bring together that full framework, there will be different types of gaps, and we have a pretty good understanding of where they might be and how we might begin to address them. And hopefully we'll be able to put some figures around that in early January to support initial discussions.
Thank you. I have Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Mayor Little. And I think Mr. Stewart kind of took one of my points, is that although these are rather introductory comments on this issue, we have been talking about this for many years. I think many of the initiatives that have come forward at council have been kind of put in the framework of, this is something we need to talk about, but we need to talk about it over a long term. We need to have a long-term financial plan to address some of the more challenging structural issues that we need to address in our community moving forward for the next 10, 15, 20 years. One of those is obviously climate adaptation and the climate emergency. We've taken a focus on that in the past year or two with council here. Another one is transportation adaptation, which ties into the climate emergency. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I'm really supportive of staff's work behind the scenes. I think it's important to note that our financial staff and our team have brought the district to be one of the leaders in asset management, if not in British Columbia, but not just in British Columbia, but probably in Canada or even on a wider basis. So we have a really good understanding of all of our current assets, the cost to replace those, and they've guided us and council to have a really strong financial policy and a financial framework to maintain those things. And I think I've been mentioning at previous workshops that kind of maintaining the status quo, we're getting really good at that. We have a really good financial framework for that, but the costs of adapting our community to some of these new emerging challenges need to be really thoroughly discussed. So I'm glad that staff have brought this forward, and I think those conversations are going to be really interesting and quite far-reaching. So appreciate this work.
Councillor Bond, Councillor Murray.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation, Rick and Mr. Wardell, Mr. Daniluk and Mr. Wardell. I just wanted to pipe up again about where we've been in this year of ours and the changes and how we need to remain flexible. We need to be able to pivot in new directions if it makes sense going forward. We need to be able to learn again from and not let this loss of life and the impacts that have presented themselves to societies around the world and what we're learning from it, how we can do things differently, what we need to plan for in the future. I'll always go back to the advice Mr. Stewart gave me when I was first elected in 1996, that plans such as our OCP, our official community plan, are living documents. They're meant to be malleable and change over time and be able to react. For every action, there's a reaction. And certainly there's been a big action for all of us in how we are living. And again, this format is one of those reactions to a situation. And so, we have to make sure that as we move forward, we are constantly being able to be flexible and respond and make sure that we're making the best decisions in regards to the taxpayers' purse and how we move forward in remaining sustainable or improving sustainability and remaining a livable community, because I think that's all we want. We all want that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't see any further speakers from council. Would any of the members of the public like to add their comments to the workshop? Okay, hearing none, then I'm going to suggest that we have completed with the business of the workshop. Mr. Stewart, were there any informational updates that you wanted to take this opportunity to share?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I guess what's going to happen now is we have a 7 o'clock meeting that has been
Your Worship, I was just going to ask Mr. Daniluk, were you going to pipe in there? Were you guys finished on both topics?
There was a very brief update on the budget, but if the report serves the need, then the information is included in the report.
Go ahead, Mr. Daniluk. I had a note that we could talk about both items at the same time and then forgot to wait for you to do the presentation. So go right ahead.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. This is part 2 of the workshop. This will be a very brief update on the 2021 budget. Staff are busy preparing the budget based on our slow and steady approach shared with Council earlier in the fall. Tonight, we're checking in with Council to confirm we're on the right path. There are new costs and emerging needs to consider, and the province has recently provided a COVID restart grant to municipalities. This grant does come with restrictions, and the province is still confirming some of the details. We've been through this timeline. These are the assumptions that were presented on October 26, with the Safe Restart grant at the bottom being new. Starting with the first one, though, our collective agreement is now confirmed at 2%. The other items are unchanged, except in some of the other costs, we are experiencing increases ahead of the 1% that was previously reported. So we'll look to make adjustments for those changes. And we'll continue to monitor these operating budget assumptions. On the assumptions for existing capital, these are also unchanged. And just of note here is that costs are and continue to rise ahead of inflation. And our 1% for asset management has been a long-standing practice and has been effective. These assumptions are also unchanged, but we do have updates to consider from the transportation plan that was shared earlier in the fall and the childcare plan from tonight. And as we bring together the long-term plan, we'll be looking at borrowing in the outer years as a means to move some of our needed new investments forward. We have reviewed this framework in the first presentation, and again, we'll be identifying significant projects with carbon impacts, and we'll be incorporating some of the best practices in the Lower Mainland with respect to our decision-making around carbon. And we'll, as mentioned earlier, we'll be bringing back the long-term financial plan in January. The investment highlights on this slide are unchanged, and as this is a rolling 5-year plan, much of the investments are a continuation of work that's already been approved by Council in prior years. This chart was also shared last presentation, and it illustrates the impacts of our current approach on ratepayers over the last 10 years. And shows that we compare well in the region with one of the lowest average municipal tax rate increases over the period. So to summarize, staff continue to recommend the slow and steady approach. There are new pressures since the last presentation, as well as new relief through the provincial grant for COVID restart. And the grant does have restrictions, and we continue to reach out to the province to understand what those restrictions are and confirm the details around that. So that concludes the second part of the workshop, and look forward to any feedback you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Daniluk. I have Councillor Curran up first.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just actually going to ask about that $6.5 million. Just generally, we've received money from the province, and is it just sitting in the piggy bank? And we're trying to understand, and what input will council have? Like, I guess we need to figure out the parameters, but if we could just get a little bit more info about that. I sit on the rec commission as well, and I know that there's some gaps that it seems like that is one area that it can potentially be used for. So just trying to understand how we plug that in, and where and when and how.
Mr. Daniluk, what strings are attached?
I'll run with that one. Through your worship, to Councillor Curran. The 6.5 million is sitting in the bank account. I understand it did come in last week. The cost pressures, staff are looking at the impacts from 2020 that have already taken place, including investments that we've made in hardening our facilities and rolling out PPE across the organization and its partner agencies. With regard specifically to the North Van Rec Commission, we've worked with the director and our management team to look very carefully at 2021 as an example with regard to how they can anticipate the rollout of their services through Restart. We've worked with both myself and the CFO from the City of North Vancouver quite closely to get an understanding of what it would take to risk manage the downside risk of opening up where the costs are a lot clearer in restart than the revenues potentially coming in, particularly when it's very hard to understand the behavior of the population and their willingness to enter into the programs that are being carefully reopened. So from that perspective, we are contingency planning, and we do have funds set aside through the 6.5 million anticipated to support the Rec Commission in the event that they do need some funds on top of what they're currently bringing in.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart, do you have a comment?
Yeah, spoken like a true manager of finance. Yeah, he's hedging his bets. All I can say is it's not a piggy bank, folks. You know, and we have to understand that, but certainly there will be an opportunity to have a discussion with council about what we do with that money. So we're preparing that now. It's just not a piggy bank. It's not a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Perhaps not the best word choice, but.
Okay.
To Mr. Danlick's point,
I made my point. Thank you.
there are restrictions.
There are restrictions.
Still learning about
very
them.
much. Attracted Mr. Stewart out of the forest there for that one. Well, I think I already shared with Mr. Stewart, I would love to see us commit a portion of that to relief to our small businesses, despite the support they've received in some cases from the provincial government and federal government. I think they are still all hurting, and I would love to start that discussion, whether it's relief on the business license costs or what other meaningful steps we could take to support our businesses. I'd love to start that conversation with our staff for that fund. I have Councillor Murray next. Councillor Murray.
Thanks. I just wanted to pipe up. I think I've been giving you sort of a running total of the kind of impact that the North Shore saw in regards to visitation during COVID, because the health officer was saying, you know, you need to get outside, and those that, you know, maybe hadn't visited our park system, you know, municipally or regionally, took the health officer up on that recommendation because we really didn't have any other options, and they went outside. And I've asked Metro Vancouver Parks for a breakdown of the visitation into our park system on the North Shore. We've closed in on 5 million visitors, which is up 40% increase from last year. And, you know, we don't know, you know, you're going to provide us with the information in regards to these restrictions on this money, but certainly, and I think Mr. Joyce has alluded to the fact that we're collaborating with Metro Vancouver, our own parks department in the province, in regards to, you know, looking at a better synergy of all of our forested and trail networks across the North Shore, because you know, the sustainability issues on the environment on our forested slopes are going to be a concern going forward because of the amount of visitation that is coming into these areas. And, you know, that leads into, you know, the increase in carbon with how people are getting here. I think I reported that, or I think Mr. Stewart or Mr. Joyce reported that the uptake on a shuttle system up in Lynn Valley during the summer didn't really go. We've been doing some pilots around the region. We're looking at pay parking in some of our parks, and the Headwaters is looking at pay parking, but you know, there's that issue as well. So I just, I'll look forward to that conversation, how some of this money can be looked at, but you know, certainly the impacts from COVID are far reaching, and our environment has been impacted in really good ways in some instances, those Himalayan mountain ranges, and then some challenging ways as well. So for every action, there's a reaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Back.
Yes, thank you. Just to echo your comments, Your Worship, around small business relief. I know in speaking, I'm on the chamber board, and there's still all kinds of hurt among the small business community. And I know the number that's been said a number of times, including the Vancouver Board of Trade, has said 25% of small businesses may not be able to keep their doors open in the next 6 months. So again, just supporting your words there, anything that we can do to provide some relief to our small businesses in the community, some of which still are not able to open, and many of which can't have their full capacity. So I would support that.
Thank you, Councillor Back. Any other members of council wishing to address this matter? Mr. Stewart, are you?
Yeah, just one comment, and just to follow up on Councillor Back's comments. I mean, our frustration is really that we understand that our small businesses are hurting, but we have legislation that prohibits us from giving them any kind of assistance. And so it really is up to the province to help us, to work with municipalities to find a way. You know, we found, for example, that our tenants, you know, are not eligible in some cases for provincial and federal programs because municipalities are the landlord. Now, my understanding is that it's shifted and they now can apply, but it's been a very moving, kind of complex environment, and we're certainly sensitive to it, but it's so difficult when we have an express legislative impediment to aiding businesses. So I just want to be fair. It's not that we don't care, we just can't according to the legislation.
No, and I appreciate you for the reminder. I am aware that the charter and the limitations that we have, but just continuing to keep it top of mind that we're looking at creative ways to help where we can. Thank you.
And I think there are other ways we can help. Councillor Back, I'd be happy to work with you on that. I do have a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce coming up shortly, which helps focus on those kinds of matters. I think what Mr. Stewart is trying to mention is that some of it has to be broad-based. It's the kind of support that we give to an entire class. It's the kind of support that we give to an entire group of businesses. And so you're basically sharing the benefit with some businesses that are doing quite well in the scenario with a bunch of businesses that are really on the brink and struggling. And so it's less of a targeted approach due to the legislation that we have to work under. But I'm certain there's certainly a willingness on my part to work on those matters with you. I have Councillor Curran.
I just wanted to echo that. I've certainly heard seen similar statistics and heard firsthand stories of the struggles that small businesses are having. And there was just a federal announcement that allows renters, I would be a renter, to apply for rent relief directly, because the rent relief that was being provided, that was the onus was on the landlord to apply for the funding, was not successful. And so that hopefully will provide some relief. I think we're all still trying to figure out what the details of that are. But that was, I think, just announced today or yesterday. It's very, very new. So that'll be maybe come up, Mayor Little, in your Mr. Little in your meeting at the chamber.
It's still the nicest thing I've been called today. I think, and then that was in response to a couple of situations, one that was highlighted in the city of North Vancouver, where it seemed a landlord was resisting actually applying on behalf of their tenant because they would like to see that tenant removed. And so there was no goodwill in the process. And so I'm glad the government has responded by making it more of a direct appeal to the renter themselves. I see Councillor Kern, your hand is still up. I'm going to lower it there. There you go. Okay. Any other members of council wishing to address this matter? Okay, thank you very much to our partners in the finance department there, Mr. Wardell and Mr. Daniluk, for your presentations today. I think at this point we're going to have a short break so we can switch over and make sure we're ready for the public meeting. Just a quick survey out there. Everybody's comfortable with the Zoom platform. Things are coming through clearly. You can hear and are keeping up. I'm seeing some thumbs up around. Okay. Good.
Just double check, Your Worship. We don't have to log off. We're using the same link.
Good question, Mr. Clerk. Just making sure that we're the same link.
That's correct, Your Worship. Nobody needs to do anything, but just a reminder, I presume you'll stay connected. So if you could just mute your microphones, perhaps turn off your cameras as well until about 5:02 when you return. And a motion to adjourn would be in order, Your Worship, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Member of council wish to put that motion forward?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Back, second by Councillor Curran. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Thank you all very much. We'll be resuming. We'll get the meeting order back up and running at about 6:55.